Well, we told you this week about a very shocking story. According to the New York Post, President Bush censored 28 pages out of Congress's investigative report on 9/11 that dealt with specific sources of foreign support for the attack. And according to the paper, information already has been leaked from the classified section of that report, and it points back to Saudi Arabia. So was 9/11 an act of terror, or was it an act of war? Well, Congressman Walter Jones and Stephen Lynch have read the redacted pages and are apparently shocked by the level of foreign state involvement in 9/11. They've now proposed a congressional resolution that asks President Obama to declassify the whole report and get the truth out to the American people. And we are just delighted to be joined now by Congressman Jones. And thank you, Congressman, for being with us today.
Janet, delighted to be so, and I think this is such an important issue, not only for the families who've lost loved ones during this period of time, but for the truth and honesty and the integrity of the American government.
Absolutely. This is a bombshell. I'm curious to ask, prior to reading the redacted pages, had you suspected any foreign state involvement, formal state involvement at all in 9/11?
Well, let me explain. Several years ago, and I tell you, deserves so much credit, and that's Senator Bob Graham, who served on the 9/11 Commission. He's now retired from the United States Senate, lives in Florida, where he's from. He wrote a book. It's a factual book. The title is Intelligence Matters. Intelligence Matters, the CIA, the FBI, Saudi Arabia, and the failure of America's war on terror. And, Janet, when I read that book about 4 or 5 years ago, it really perked my interest into where is the truth about 9/11. Right. And since that time, before I even read the classified version of the 28 pages, I had family members, and I'm from North Carolina, as you well know. Steve Lynch is from Massachusetts, the Northeast, where the tragedy took place. I've had family members through the years just to say, Congressman, please help us find out the truth of what happened on 9/11 to our loved ones. And once I was able to go read the classified information, it just opened my eyes. And I can honestly say, and I encourage Steve Lynch, he is a friend of mine, he's a Democrat, but he's a good friend of mine, to read the pages. And I'm encouraging Steve and I, the first 10 days of January, we're going to write every member of the House and ask them to go down. You have to go to the Intelligence Committee, and the chairman and ranking member, Mike and Rogers and Dutch Rupenberger, they are a Republican Democrat. They have to kind of sign off on you going down to read this information because it is classified. But I would say to you, Janet, and to the American people, you've already given a introduction of what Bob Graham has already been writing about, and I would tell you, I don't think it threatens the national security of this country at all. If it did, I wouldn't be so out front on this, but I think it's information that the American people have every right to see and to make their own judgment.
Absolutely. Do we know anything at all about why those 28 pages were redacted officially from the Bush administration?
Well, after reading the 28 pages, you put me in a very difficult position to answer your question.
Okay, I don't want to do that.
I would just only say that if you, no matter who you might be, if you believe in the truth, then the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
But there is a reason, in my opinion, why previous administrations have not wanted to declassify this information that I cannot get into. But I will say that what Stephen and we hope to build numbers on this. This is going to be it's going to take 2 or 3 or 4 months to put pressure on Congress. That's why I wanted to be on your show, and hope as we get into the new year and we continue to press on this. And Janet, what we hope to do, Steve and I have already talked about it, after we send the letter out the first 10 days of January 2014, what we'd like to do is do a press conference with the families sometime about the middle of February to get some of the families to come down, and several of them live out west, as you know, maybe with Senator Graham to come up and call on the Congress to pass this resolution asking President Obama to declassify this information.
Good. Have you spoken much with 9/11 families about the resolution?
I've had several to call me. There are groups that are still organized that have contacted me and Steve Lynch separate of each other in the last few weeks, telling us anything they can do to help us move this forward. That they just want so badly that the American people can see the truth about 9/11.
Unbelievable. I mean, here we are 12 years later, and it's like we're going back to square one in some ways.
Amen. And Janet, you and I know, and I know how you're an advocate of this, but how can we have the confidence that we need from the American people when we will not permit them to see information that led to one of the worst disasters in our country's history?
Well, that's exactly right. Congressman Walter Jones with me. We'll be coming back on the Janet Mefford Show talking about this 28-page redacted section of this important report on 9/11. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Janet Mefford Show. My guest is North Carolina Congressman Walter Jones. He and Democrat Stephen Lynch have read redacted pages, 28 of them, in this investigative report from Congress on 9/11 that dealt with specific sources of foreign support for 9/11, and now are calling for a resolution in the House to declassify this report, this section of the report, so the American people can get more information on this apparently foreign support tied to 9/11. Was this an act of terror or actually an act of war? Now, you know, it's interesting, Congressman Jones, and I know you're limited in what you can say about those 28 pages since it is classified, but there was a lot of talk at the time about Saudi Arabia in the initial days after 9/11, the fact that Anwar al-Awlaki was spirited out of the country and Saudi representatives met him. And there were all sorts of questions about that. And yet many people said, why did we go into Iraq and Afghanistan? We know, this was such a big topic at the time. Reflecting back on those days, what do you think about all that now?
Well, I agree with the assessment by many individuals, as well as a lot of articles that have been written, books. I mentioned Bob Graham's earlier. And I will tell you that I believe sincerely that we were manipulated because the previous administration did not shoot straight with the American people. I don't think Iraq was a necessary war. Maybe Afghanistan initially, because that's where the terrorists were coming from, but the Afghan war was a diversion. And to me, this whole thing deals with our international friends, and we need to evaluate that friendship. And when what I have seen and Steve has seen and Frank Wolf from Virginia, I can honestly say that the American people need to see this information and make up their own mind. They don't need Walter Jones to tell them what to think.
Right.
I want them to think for themselves, but they will not have that opportunity if we cannot declassify these 28 pages.
Well, let me ask you this, Congressman. What do we know about the funding of 9/11 on the record? I mean, as a congressman, what, through the 9/11 report and through other memos from the CIA and FBI, what do we know officially about the funding, how it was all done?
Well, I think we know that certain countries around the world were very supportive, financially supportive of those hijackers who came to this country to be trained and to bring down the towers and create havoc as they did in Pennsylvania and Washington, D.C. And these relationships, in my opinion, of those who financed this attack on America, these relationships should be questioned, and whether these relationships deserve to have the friendship of the American people.
That's right. Well, and this is such a game changer, because if you are able to get this section declassified, people can find out what's in this report. A lot of people say, what are the implications now if we do find out that in fact there was foreign support for 9/11? What can be done 12 years after the fact? People say, we don't want to be in another war, but what would we do?
Well, I'm not sure that another war would be necessary, but I think any time that an individual or a nation is better informed, it will make better decisions for the future.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. Well, would there be the support in the House so far that, as far as what you know and people you've talked to in the House, that this resolution will go forward and that there will be the pressure brought to bear on the president to declassify this?
Janet, if members of Congress would take the time and get the authorization from the chairman and ranking member and take the time to read the 28 pages, we will build the support. And that's what Steve and I are going to try to do, and that is to keep beating this drum every so often. You can't beat it every day or every week. People get tired of hearing the drum beat.
Yep.
But on this one, we're going to send the letters out in early January, encourage members. We might get one or two or three to go down and to read the 28 pages. Then we're going to do a news conference with early February, maybe mid-February, with the families and hopefully Senator Graham coming up. And we're going to do something in March, April. We need to build the numbers, and these outside family groups can be enormous in their help. And being on shows like yours, quite frankly.
Well, thank you. I really want to do everything I can to support this because everybody wants the truth about 9/11. And I mean, there should be nothing that's covered up. That's the real outrage here. Everybody deserves to know what actually happened.
But Janet, if members that you've got such a wide listening audience, if they would just call their member of Congress and just tell them, how about looking at House Resolution 428?
Right.
That's all. They don't even have to tell them what it says. But if they do, say it deals with 9/11 and the truth.
Has there been much of an effort prior to this whole thing previously to get this redacted information brought out and declassified?
I think there's been an effort, and it was led by Bob Graham and some senators when he was in the Senate. But I think this is a little different because it's 12 years later now, and I think that there's an opportunity for the American people to renew the effort for the truth. And I'm just optimistic, to be honest with you. I know it's going to take work. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to take work. But quite frankly, I think the American people deserve the truth.
They do. It's interesting. The New York Post story written by Paul Sperry, which is, I think, must reading for everybody, goes into some of the on the source reporting about this. One of the things they mentioned, because you mentioned Senator Graham, who was chair of the Joint Inquiry, he had asked the FBI for some case files in Sarasota and couldn't get them. And this is pertaining to Mohammed Atta, the ringleader of 9/11, and other hijackers, visiting a home that was owned by a Saudi advisor to the nephew of King Fahd of Saudi Arabia.
Amen.
And then later on, the Saudi home was abandoned a few weeks before 9/11. And, we can't find out what happened with it. And there are other incidents in other cities. It's as if the string is just not put together.
Janet, I think politically there are a lot of reasons that this information is still declassified, and I think you understand fully what I'm saying.
I do. Well, when you refer to his book, and there are other books, great books out there about 9/11 that have brought some of this out, have there been books besides Senator Graham's that have been really on the money about 9/11 that you think people ought to really look into more?
Well, I would get Sarah to email you some websites. There have been quite a few reporters who have done extensive investigation that I think has been very accurate, especially now that I've read the information. I wouldn't have said that before reading the information, but now, having read the information, that I think they've been pretty close to being on target. I really do.
Why do you think? Research. Good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. Why is it that you think we have not had more pressure on this issue to really dig in even more deeply to the sources of funding and the direct links potentially to other sources? I
think that those who make certain decisions would like for the American people just not to be concerned about what I think is so important. That's integrity and truth. Well,
Congressman Walter Jones, we sure appreciate what you're doing. God bless you, and we'll keep on top of this.
Thank you so much, Janet.